All right, we'll see if you guys can hear me. Let me know if you guys can hear. All right, we're going to check. All right, can you guys hear me now? All right, let me know if you can hear. All right, so it looks like people can hear. All right, so we'll get started in a couple minutes. If you guys want to go ahead and type in your questions, and if you get a chance to just introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, that'd be really handy. So I see we got some return people. We have Mo from Reading, Pennsylvania. I think it's good to see you again. So we have Reggie from LA, and we have Michael from Atlanta. All right, so if you guys want to go ahead and ask your questions, please feel free to type it. I'll go ahead and enter it in. All right. Thanks, Paul, for tuning in from the UK. We know it's late there. Richard from Las Vegas. Feel free to go ahead and ask your questions. As we do this, there's a bit of a delay. So let me know if you can't hear it, which is I'm kind of watching it a little bit here. So we have a question from Michael, kind of what the format is. It's really just kind of go ahead and ask questions, and we'll go through and try to answer them to the best of my ability. So please feel free to go ahead and ask any questions, and we'll kind of try to get through all the questions that we can until about 9 o'clock. Okay, so I see Avi's question about freezing tracks. I'm going to open up a different document here so I keep notes. Okay, so I see questions again from Abby on parabola automation. Greg, good to see you from Portland, Oregon again. Okay, I see questions about tempo of vocals and assigning beats to it. We'll go ahead and take a look at that. Nuendo is included, Wavelab's included, any Steinberg products we can go through. So if you have a question from Michael about is it just on Cubase or is it on Nuendo as well, please feel free to ask any questions. I'm going to start logging some of the questions that are coming in. And again, if you have questions, please feel free to enter them in the comments field. All right, so I'm just making some notes here. Hi, Dan from San Francisco. Thanks for joining us. We had a question from Paul in the UK about a video session on Groove Agent 4. There's about 2 weeks ago I uploaded. There's about 55 minutes of Groove Agent 4 videos just on the youtube.com/clubcubase channel, or if you go to the Steinberg Software YouTube channel. So if you watch those on the Steinberg Software channel, they're called like Walking Through Groove Agent. Also, if you look at the last month's Google Hangout, we spent about 40 minutes or so on Groove Agent 4, but we're happy to kind of go over any particular questions that you have as well on it. Okay, I'm just logging some of the questions so we get through them. All right, so just kind of logging questions. If you have questions, please feel free to enter them in. All right, so we're just kind of jotting down all the questions here so we can go through them. Again, if you have questions, we'll get started in just a minute. Okay, so for Michael, we'll go over some of the differences with Nuendo and Cubase, especially for film. All right, so I'm just reading through some of the questions here. We'll get started in just a minute. Okay, I'm just going to make sure I'm not missing any of the questions already asked here. I'm just reviewing. Excuse me, then we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, you guys ready to get started? We'll go ahead. We have some questions here. So let me just go through some questions that we have. Okay, just found another question I missed. Okay. We have a lot of good questions for tonight. So, okay. So we have some questions on freezing tracks sounding different, tempo, extracting tempo from vocals, drawing automation and some of the parabola tools, and if that could be bent, the automation curves, converting intros and endings MIDI patterns with Groove Agent 4, some CC121 and MR816 CSX, about general MIDI and kind of having 5 or 6 parts, some Cubase and Nuendo differences, note expression, the difference with the dongle, the E-licenser in Cubase 7.5 from Elements, Groove Agent 4 compatibility, variations of drum loops, adding click tracks to musics and to non-tempo synced music, and also CC continuous controllers when editing MIDI. Okay, so just I see one more addition to the questions. Okay. All right. So we'll go get started. So the first one we'll go over is going to be a question on. We'll just do this one on working if you get tracks that don't have click tracks. So let me just go ahead and open up a particular track here. Okay, so let's say if we listen to this particular track, and let me just remove a couple of tracks here real quick, that we notice that the tracks may not actually have, are recorded with a click track. And you often see this with live recordings. So if you wanted to actually be able to deal with this, let's say we listen to this particular track.
One, two,
so we have a count in from the singer.
3, 4.
But the audio itself is pretty independent of the click track. And there's no real correlation to it. So you could take any track that has kind of rhythmically significant material. I'm going to take just, in this case, it could be often like a drum track or drum overhead track. And then at that point, what we want to do is select it and then go to the project menu. And at this point, we'll go to and select tempo detection. So once we do a tempo detection, I can analyze it. It does its analysis, and it's automatically created a tempo map. So if we listen to the tempo map, and as we play, we now have the tempo map directly of the mandolin track. So if this was recorded live, which is often the case, that would kind of be the tempo for all the different tracks. So now, as we do this, it is automatically added a tempo track, and it is automatically added a time signature track. So often what you may want to do is, and it puts one thing to be aware of is that the time signatures actually starts in 1/4 time. So when I come here and I have my 1/4 meter, we don't assume that all music's in 4/4. So we have 3, 4, 5, 4.
Turning Japanese. 1, 2.
So what I do, we actually get a count in here from the singer.
1.
And what I want to do is just grab my drawing tool, and then we can make sure that the snap is turned on. So as we listen to where the singer
1.
So right there, we'll now just put in our 4/4 bar.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
And we've now figured out kind of what the tempo of the existing tracks are. Now, if I wanted to add a different, drum loop, or if I wanted to add something like a VST instrument, like our Groove Agent, I can now just come here and, once we have something that's kind of pattern based, we'll add a Groove Agent, and let's say I'll just kind of add a percussion section here. So we'll go ahead, create a track. I'll load up an agent we'll load up one of our percussion agents, and I'll just do something. We'll just randomly pick something. So now that we know what the tempo is, we can just simply, at this point, turn on our patterns, and as we would hit play,
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
we could just have these patterns. And have those patterns kind of automatically synchronize and change based on the beat. Or if you add a drum loop, etc., and place it into musical mode, we could do kind of the same thing. But if we have audio that is fluctuating in tempo, and we may want to straighten that tempo out afterwards, one of the great things that you could do is to select all of the different tracks in your project. And this is a key thing, to select those tracks. Go to your audio menu to advanced. At this point, you can select the set definition from tempo. So while a lot of programs deal with tempo, like tempo stamping of one static value, we can now just come here and I could apply all of the changes from the different, all the tempo changes, and embed that directly within the files here. So once we see this little icon in the upper right hand corner, at this point this will have all this metadata. So if I change the tempo, let's say if I want it to be 120 beats a minute, I could see my original tempo here, and I could see the tempo that we desire right here. So as I hit play, now every track will play back at 120 beats a minute. If I want it to be 144, type it in. 156 or 96 beats a minute. Or if you wanted it to actually just kind of take the existing tempo and speed it up, slow it down, we can just graphically edit the tempo. Or if you wanted to just draw in tempo changes here, I'll just turn my snap off here, and we just have it do a retard. So as we do this, we have our original tempo. Where it's now sped up. Then we'll have kind of our tempo changes pretty radically here. So at that point, if you have something that was played without a click track that you wanted to tighten up, it's very easy to change that. Or if you wanted to, take something that was, just fluctuating in tempo and add loops or add MIDI and have kind of that correlation to the bar and beat. The tempo detection works incredibly well for that. So it's incredibly powerful to be able to kind of, have that control of stretching every track, every beat to conform to your desired tempo. So I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions on that, please feel free to kind of make a comment, and we could go back and reiterate some of the points. All right, so we'll move on. I see a question about the UR44, where to set the sample rate, and from Greg McCarthy. I think you're in Portland. So to set the sample rate for any of your Cubase or Nuendo projects, you can right-click, come right over here to the project menu, and at this point we go to project setup. The UR44 will do up to 192K, so we can do that fully in Cubase. So you can select your sample right there. Now, with most audio interfaces, if you find that maybe a lot of as the project is growing, that the buffer size needs to be increased to kind of alleviate some of the stress on the audio driver, you could go to your device setup here. So devices to device setup, and go to your VST audio system. And if you select the selected ASIO driver here, or the core audio driver, at that point you'll have a control panel. And here you could set the buffer size. So if you have kind of a faster computer or more capable computer, you could often kind of run much smaller buffers, like down to 64 samples. Or if you wanted to, alleviate some of the stress of the computer, maybe during mixdown, you could just adjust your buffer size directly there. And that way you could kind of allocate some of your CPU resources more efficiently for a particular project. So I think we had a question about, applying it to vocals. So that tempo will work for any audio or MIDI. So you could do that with any track. So you could do tempo detection from the vocals itself. Often it may not be the best choice using vocals, because it may not, depending on the material, like if the vocalist isn't singing in particular sections, it may not pick up the tempo, but you could often do that for vocals as well. Now, one thing, getting back to the tempo, if you have a track and perhaps it's not enough rhythmically for it to actually figure out what's going on for tempo, and you want to set it manually, that's what this time warp tool allows you to do. So at this point, you could just manually adjust the bars. So you can say, okay, I need this measure, I need the grid to fall right on this part. And as you can see, as you adjust, you could have the tempo adjusted right there. So this, with the time warp tool, that allows you to kind of move the bar line to match the existing audio events. So if you have something like a vocal where there's a lot of pauses and you just can't, it doesn't have enough material to figure out the beat, you can use the time warp tool and just kind of drag the bar or the beat directly in line, and that way you can kind of manually set it yourself. So all right, so let's see if that makes sense for people. All right, so let's go back to some of our questions. We had a couple of questions on Groove Agent 4. So let's go ahead and open up a project on that. I know we had some people that wanted to see some more on Groove Agent 4 on the youtube.com/Club Cubase. There's just right before the end of August, we posted about 55 minutes of pretty in-depth stuff on Groove Agent 4, but we'll go over some more stuff because we kind of did it in depth last month as well. So we had a couple questions on Groove Agent 4. One that was just posted about the pattern selection MIDI export field. Please explain. MIDI pattern player, style player, when they're active. Where's the MIDI export? Okay, so we'll go over this. So once we have Groove Agent 4 loaded up, you can have not only layers for all of your individual samples here, but you could also click on the pattern layer. And these patterns here will respond to MIDI notes. So if I wanted to come here, you could just kind of trigger this. Now, with the acoustic agent, what's kind of interesting is to help out kind of the songwriting process. There's a lot of patterns that are just kind of different grooves, but we have some patterns that are preset done for you that can work either in, that are set up for different song structures. So we have different intros or endings. So we have this a lot where people have like kind of a basic groove for a verse or a chorus and a bridge, and they don't know how to end or begin. So any of the preset patterns will give you, and these are often differentiated by color. So we have kind of the green colors here as being more, intros. This color was kind of a reddish orangish. I'm not great with colors. Will be endings. The blue indicate fills. And these patterns can be indicative of like more of the verse or chorus, kind of different groove patterns. Now, there's nothing that really differentiates these. These are just MIDI information that are triggered. So if I had a MIDI controller here, I could just trigger. And you could just now trigger these. Now, all you'd have to do now, if I come right over here, is I could choose to open up my virtual keyboard, and if I wanted to record, all I'd have to do is select this track, and then we'll start off by hitting just and let me take it out of loop record mode, which would probably make more sense. So we'll do our recording again. So let's just take this out of loop mode. So as we do this, we'll hit record. If we want to do drum fill. So what you're able to do is to actually sequence the events directly here. So you don't have to export it as a particular file. Now, if you did want to actually have it on the timeline, what you're able to do is you see this little icon just to the right here, and we're able to just simply just drag the selected pattern. So if I select this pattern, I can now let's select that pattern. I want that to start right there. And if you wanted to copy that, there's a couple ways of doing it. One way is just hit, if I bypass my virtual keyboard, this gives us our keyboard shortcut. So if I wanted to hold down Control D, that's one great way. Another really hip way of copying parts on the project window is just to hold down the Alt key, and you'll see it from the cursor, the main object selection tool. You'll see it turn into a pencil when you get to the lower right-hand corner, and then all you have to do is just drag directly across, and then you can make copies just like that. So any of these patterns you can just drag and drop. Now, once you have this pattern in, you can also just say, okay, I want to go to the drum map of a particular track. And we could actually create the drum map from the instrument. So when I open up an editor, at this point I could see exactly where my kicks, hi-hats fall directly within my drum editor itself, and this will carry the names over from the particular instrument. So we can, in essence, kind of play the patterns from MIDI notes, and we see the MIDI note kind of labeled here in the upper right-hand corner. Or you have the ability to drag and onto the main timeline. Now, if we've altered a particular pattern, let's say if I come here and I grab my eraser tool and I just want to take out some of these hi-hats, and we have a different pattern, and maybe I wanted to tweak the velocities of the snare, so we've altered this pattern. At this point, if I wanted to simply, grab it, all I'd have to do to have it on a pattern, so I'll grab my drumstick tool, we'll add a couple drum sounds there. And if I wanted to make this my own pattern, I can just drag it directly onto a pad. So you can go to your bank just by dragging and selecting the bank there, or go directly to the pad. And my horrible drum pattern I just created was laid out for you directly there. Now, if I click on this little, for any of the patterns, if I wanted to do some further editing within Groove Agent itself, you could actually turn it into MIDI. And once you do that, this little pattern becomes illuminated or becomes activated here. And now you could just kind of right click, and instead of having your Groove Agent having to use the Cubase drum editor, if you're using another program, you could just simply come right here and have all the drum editing by right clicking and zooming in and out directly here. So while you can obviously it has a kind of great drag and drop of your MIDI information, so the patterns can be sequenced in of themselves, or you could drag the patterns directly onto your timeline. You don't have to do like a MIDI file export. But all you had to do, so if you wanted to use it with other programs, like we had a question, will it work with Logic or Pro Tools? It works as an AU plugin. It also works as a standalone plugin. So if you wanted to run it like in Vienna Pro as a host program, you could definitely do that, or just run it standalone and route MIDI to it on any computer. So it gets to be very, very flexible with that. So there's a lot of great compatibility with being able to kind of trigger and have real-time performance aspects in addition to dragging and dropping directly onto your timeline without having to set up any kind of MIDI routing or anything like that. And one of the best things is, once you kind of hit play in Groove Agent, you just come right here and it's creating music. So if you want to write a song, or if you wanted to mix and match your patterns, we could actually load up a pattern group that's independent of the actual pattern. So here's my pattern that I made, but let's say if I wanted something a little more funky oriented, or I'll show you something else that's kind of cool first. You could also have different swings. So if you want to come here and kind of select, let's say I want to take this pattern here, like kind of a, pretty generic sounding pattern. So you're able to kind of add different levels of swing. But let's say if I wanted to take some of the preset patterns, and we'll load up a quick pattern group. Say something a little more funky like this. I could take this pattern and edit it. And you have this kind of XY axis. So I have kind of dynamic control. And this is with the preset patterns. And you have going horizontally different levels of complexity. So as I move this more over to the right, you could have it be more complex. So you have 16 levels of complexity. Or if you say, okay, I want more swing. Or you could have kind of natural variations here. So you could say, okay, I just want this. And all these things could be very right-click and learn and place it on a MIDI controller. But you could also say, okay, every bar do a natural variation. So that's not playing the same pattern over and over again. Or if you wanted to have a drum fill, a random fill every 4 bars. There's our drum fill. So this way you can kind of just start off initially and have kind of great inspiring drums to work with without, having to copy every single thing out. So just kind of start Cubase and hit play in Groove Agent, and then the two will be synced up so you can do all of your changes. And I like that, especially if I'm like writing a song and I don't want to spend like all of my creative energy working on the drum pattern, and then when I get to write the song, my creative energy is kind of spent. So you could do a tremendous amount with the different drum patterns right there. So pretty cool. See if you guys have any questions. Now, one other thing with the patterns that you do. So again, any of the patterns can be working with any intro ending, so you can kind of edit those and create those as you want. But one of the things that's also kind of worth pointing out is this concept of jam mode. So if I just click right here, we can put this into jam mode, and as I click on a particular pad, we can have, and you could set this up here when we see our jam state. So we can think of, we have 4 different jam states. So there's a standard, next, a return, stop. And you can think of this as intro, pattern, fill, ending if you want. So if I'm here, and let's say I just hit my intro pattern, now, as soon as it finishes the intro, it'll go right into a verse there. Now, as soon as I click on one of the fills that's labeled as the return, it'll go right back directly to the pattern. So if I want to go to a different pattern, and then we do another fill, so then it jumps immediately back to the pattern. And let's say if I go and click on an ending now, so it'll trigger the ending and just play. And once that finishes, the drums will stop playing. So very, very handy for that. I think hopefully that kind of covers your question. I think Monster Jazz Licks. So I hopefully that's kind of what you're looking for with your question. All right, let me just go read through some of the comments here. So I see a question from Musictron Guest about download a Groove Agent 4 to have it as a VST 2.5 plugin, but I believe it does come as a VST. I don't know of a VST 2. I think there's a VST 2.4 spec, but it works as a VST 2, VST 3 AU. And we also had Monster Jazz Licks had a question about Groove Agent 3. So there's a tremendous amount more of what you could do within Groove Agent 4. So there's a lot more capability. So it will take you just a little bit of time to kind of get your head wrapped around it. And I think once you do, you'll really kind of like it. All right. So, and of course, like any VST instrument, all you'd have to do is just, if you want to export it as a WAV file for working in our programs, or just to have a safety copy, just simply come right over here and you can do your export audio mix down, and you could select your Groove Agent or your individual outputs. So just like any other virtual instrument, so you could automatically have it rendered as audio within your project as well. So there's one question about the future of the CC121 and MR816 CSX. So they're still supported. The CC121 is still active. They've been in the market now about 6.5 years. So they've been in the market for a while. We don't see a lot of FireWire interfaces selling just because the lack of inclusion of FireWire. So a lot of things have kind of gone to USB 2. Which is available on all computers. But so while we may not see a lot of new developments on them, they're still supported. And that's I have 2 MR816 CSXs and a CC121 in my personal studio, and I'm pretty confident that they'll be working for many more years to come. And it's one of the great things working with such a great company like Yamaha when they're doing product design, is a great kind of lifetime of support for many of the different products. So while you may not see a lot of news or attention because they're kind of older interfaces for FireWire, and they don't easily translate to working with iOS like our new UR interfaces, but they're still supported and work great, and drivers are continuously being updated when needed for later operating systems. All right, so we had a couple questions on automation. So let's go ahead and take a look at some automation capability. Just open up a project here. Yeah, and if you want to check out Groove Agent 4, I believe that there is a trial version now online. So if you wanted to kind of try it out. And again, you can really kind of watch some of the tutorial videos, and it'll kind of take you step by step through a lot of the different things for the beat agent, the percussion agent as well. All right, so we'll go ahead and take a look at the automation. So we got some questions on using the parabola tool or being able to kind of bend it a little bit more. One of the things, if you don't see the initial automation parameters, one of the things to be kind of cognizant of is if you click here in the lower left-hand corner, you could see the automation lanes. So there's a couple different ways to automate or change the volume of a vocal, and they don't necessarily always come in a form of automation. So one way is to just, as you select an event here, let's say we cut just a range of this vocal here with my scissors tool. Now we have an object selection tool. So if you wanted to just kind of grab the upper center handle, and you'll kind of see this when you go to the center and the upper part, you can just kind of grab and make something, you know, softer or louder just based directly here. So if you have, and I find this really handy on vocals, like maybe you have a plosive or a breath that's kind of really a bit, you know, too loud, or, you know, sometimes if you get rid of a vocal, like a breath, it could sound really unnatural. So here you can just actually grab just kind of the event handle and adjust volume. Another way of doing it is to grab your drawing tool and just draw in changes. Now, these changes, both kind of the event-based changes that we see here, and what's kind of handy about those, and why a lot of like big mix engineers really like that, is because it's so easy to kind of regulate the volume levels before you hit the compression stage. So you could have everything kind of dialed in and kind of have levels matched pretty easily. And then at that point, kind of use compressors for specific effect. I also know some mix engineers that do this trick where they may just take like each measure, and then if you split, let's say if I enable my snap by hitting the letter J on my keyboard, and let's say I cut at the measure here, and if you hold down the Alt or Option key, you could then split at every single bar. So a lot of people in Austin, they call this kind of cut and run automation, where, you know, this way you could just say, you could just kind of touch up this word, touch up that phrase independently. You could do it kind of musically based, which is really handy, especially after you do kind of, once you find a grid of the audio with the correlation of the bar and beat. But we also see the automation below here. So as we look at this, I could draw in automation, and we see kind of the waveform here, so you could actually get a sense of what's going on within, you know, how it relates directly there. Now, one of the questions I had, we were at our Club Cubase meeting in New York last week, and one of the guys wanted to be able to he didn't want to see this. This is a very common feature request by users, to be able to see the waveform. So if you open up your automation panel and click here on the settings, and the automation panel is, you'll see the automation panel, like the different types of automation directly here. So if you click just directly to the right of the automation, this will open up your automation panel, and there's some really handy things in here. So if you wanted to just show data on tracks, if you wanted to get rid of that, all you have to do is click there, and then you can hide it. So we had so many people requested, but one guy in New York last week was very adamant that, you know, it was bothering him to see the waveform. So very, very powerful for that. Now we can have different automation tools. So as I draw in, I could not only have just kind of a straight line. So as I do this, we could have it automatically interpret. So we have kind of a free form pencil. selecting some of the other tools, we can have a line tool. So if I wanted it to be like a straight fade out here. Now, as we have the automation here, this ties directly into our fader. So as I would play back, we would see the lead vocal fader here just fade out. So there's a direct correlation there. Now, we have more drawing tools than just using just a straight line. So there's a parabola tool, and what's kind of handy about this is you can just kind of enter the automation data there. Now, some of these tools will have kind of alternate functions. So you see it's kind of curving up to the right. Now, if I hit the control key, I can change kind of the arc of that curve. So if you see how it's kind of arcing up. So it's kind of like maybe more like an M as opposed to like a U. So your arc key directly there, just hitting the control, will change the direction of that. Now, as you do this, it will kind of interpret your different points there. Now, so if I have my point here and I wanted to bend it some more, I could just select a number of points or just those 2 points and be able to say, okay, I want to select these points here and move those. And we can copy your automation freely as well. Now, one of the things that's also really handy, if you grab kind of the range selection tool, or if you grab, let me just set this up correctly. Let's say we have a whole series of automation. You'll see that once you select the automation range here, there's additional tools, and we see this from our note expression. So if I wanted to really just kind of take those automation points, I'll shut off the waveform. This might be a little easier to see online this way just temporarily. So if I wanted to select this range of automation, these are some of the editing paradigms that were introduced with our note expression. So if I say, okay, I just want to take this automation and kind of flatten it some, or you could go to the upper left-hand corner handle and you could adjust kind of the beginning curve or the ending curve of the automation. So you have a tremendous amount of control kind of right here. And again, you can, just freely kind of arc your automation, move it around. If you like that particular automation, you can copy, come here, and paste that same automation. So if you have the perfect automation for a chorus that you wanted to do over and over again, it's very simple. So this is kind of independent of the part. And so you could actually use, both, kind of clip-based automation that you want. So grabbing just the handles here in addition to the fades. And if you wanted to edit the fades, just double click and you could open up kind of your fade editor. Or kind of using the automation. So a lot of different parameters here, and you have different drawing tools. So not only just the parabola, but if you want to come here, you could have your sine wave. So I say, okay, I want this to kind of have my different values. And if you wanted to hold down the shift key, you could change the frequency of that. So if you say, okay, I want that to be very tight in my automation, or if I wanted to, with my sine tool, to kind of spread it out and have it synchronized. So your shift key can change the frequency of that as well. And in addition, if you hold down control, you could invert the sine wave right there. So as you draw in, so if you want it to look like that, or, to have it be inverted. So a number of different powerful automation tools that you can use to kind of stretch and change it. Now, one of the things that's a lot of people don't necessarily understand is some of these settings here within the automation panel itself. So one of them that's really handy is, like, let's say if you're doing a big mix, there's these 2 start and 2 end functions. So when I click on a parameter, You know, you can click on it once, or you could actually click on it twice to lock that particular parameter. So let's say if I was automating a track here, and I wanted this value to be written like until the start. Let's say I haven't gotten to the vocal track in my mix. I could just come here, and as soon as I let go, just put in touch mode here. And as soon as I stop, you'll see that that value where I stopped was written in at the very beginning of the clip. So if I don't get to a particular clip, I could just come here. And then if I wanted this value to be written until the end, I just select right there. And now that value has been written directly to the end. So you have to start, to end. And you could also set it within a loop or directly like until the punch point. Now there's different suspending of reading and writing of automation parameters as well. So let's say if I have my channel open and I'm adjusting my volume here, but I'm maybe tweaking the EQ and I'm kind of searching for the right frequencies. I've seen a lot of people do this in their mix where all of a sudden as they're searching for the right frequencies in the EQ, they didn't realize that they were writing the automation for that. So you could actually suspend reading and writing of different types of automation tracks as well. So this way you could only have the volume be written as automation and you could tweak the EQ without writing all the changes and what ends up sounding like bad filter sweeps. Now, when we look at our automation here, there's also 3 different modes within Cubase. You're going to have touch, auto latch, and crossover. So when I go to my touch mode, as soon as I touch the fader, and then when I release, the automation gets unwritten just like that. Now, if I go to auto latch, that value will just stay when I let go of the mouse until I stop. Now, there's kind of an interesting one here called crossover. And what this is going to allow you to do is as soon as you kind of cross over the threshold here, so we'll put this into automation, it'll start to write, and then when I come back over the existing threshold, the automation will kick out. So if I'm here, we're in crossover, start writing, and now I bring it up, then it'll just automatically go back to that point. And that's really handy for doing like quick vocal touch-ups and stuff like that. So a lot of great automation capabilities directly inside of Cubase that really, do a tremendous amount of flexibility and can really, cover just about any automation need. So I hope that covers some of the automation questions. I saw a comment about the CC121, how you'd be lost without it. I kind of feel the same way. In my studio, it's kind of my left hand is my CC121, and my right hand is my mouse. So I feel the same way, and that's why you kind of still see it supported, because a lot of us that have built and designed hardware use it every day as well. Let me go through some of the other questions. All right, so we had a question about the e-licenser, or what some people call dongle, in Cubase 7.5. How that, with Cubase Artist 7.5 and Cubase 7.5, you get a hardware e-licenser dongle. And what that's going to enable, and that is where the license is stored with the Cubase Elements and Cubase AI, Cubase LE, some of the OEM versions. Just uses a soft e-licenser technology. So you use kind of the computer to store the license, whereas the other versions allow you to store it directly onto, or the license can only be stored on the hardware e-licenser, which is the USB key or dongle, some people will call it. So that's why you see it. And what's great about that is once you've installed that key, Everything else will just simply work. You can install it on multiple computers and just simply move that key back and forth. So it gets to be really handy. So you have like multiple computers, just simply move your e-licenser. I've had the same one for about 11 years now that I've carried with me throughout the world, and it's pretty resilient and works really well. But I like the convenience, especially when you go through a lot of different computers and reauthorizations. Kind of the e-licenser is a great mechanism for that. All right, so we had a question about using drum loops and doing kind of drum loop variations. So we'll go ahead and take a look at this. So drum loops are kind of very easy to work with, and convenient. But often you want to have it's kind of in the name itself that drum loops loop over and over and over again, and sometimes they could be a little repetitive. So as we're working with this, let me just okay. So let's say if I have a particular drum loop in my project here, and I wanted to have variations on that particular drum loop. So let's say I start off, and we'll do this with Groove Agent SE4, which comes with Cubase 7.5. So now what's great about this is with Groove Agent SE4 or Groove Agent 4, you can just drag and drop and take the loop directly onto one of the instrument pads. So if I have my drum loop here, and now if I wanted that on my particular drum pad, I just drag and drop that loop. So now I could just trigger, and I hit it twice, so that's why you kind of hear the delay. So if I click on the pad, so once I have that activated, I can now go to the slice menu and click on create slices. Now what it's done is, and we could use kind of different modes. We could use transient, grid, transient plus grid, or you can manually add the slices. So now instead of triggering the whole entire drum loop from just hitting one pad, it's taking a kick, hi-hat, snare, hi-hat, snare, and it's taken each of these slices of the rhythmically significant material, and at this point it's assigned it to its own pad. Now interestingly enough, it's made a pattern directly here on the pad, on the pattern layer. So if I triggered this pattern, so it's going to sound exactly the same. So it kind of has a collection of all of the MIDI notes. And what's cool about this is we have this little icon where we could drag this pattern directly to our project window. So now that I've dragged that to my project window, I can hit play on our audio loop, and now it's going to trigger the individual MIDI notes directly here on. So it's created a MIDI pattern where we could see, and it's going to have the same rhythmic capability, so it sounds exactly the same. But if I wanted to have natural variations, I'll come here and we'll just go into our drum editor. Take this, and let's say I start off with a kick. I'm just going to use the arrow keys, and very scientifically, not at all random, just change the notes around. So now, if we have our original drum loop, now it's triggered in MIDI, and now we'll have our variations, and that has the same sounds, the same rhythm, the same groove. So it's very easy to just kind of take that and have those natural variations that quickly. Now, if I wanted to trigger that pattern pad, I could just drag it and drop it and just sequence that pad right there, which is that adjusted pattern right there. Now, the Groove Agent 4 SE kind of goes, does all that, but takes it to get kind of a different level. So if I wanted to open up a copy of Groove Agent 4, so the full version, and we drag this loop onto, so we're going to take that same loop, we're going to slice it. So I go to Edit and Slice. Now, sometimes it's hard to know exactly what notes are kicks, snares, or hi-hats. So we have this classification system. So once I click on Classify, it's now color-coded all similar elements. So all these colors are snares, the yellow, hi-hats, and these will be kicks, and you might have the kick and the hi-hat kind of layered together. But now I can see all those different changes, and when I go to my pattern layer, we could actually go to your pattern here, and let's say, for instance, in this drum loop, if you really liked one particular snare over a different snare, you could right-click in the pattern editor, and we could set all of the snare notes to be triggered by that one particular note. So if I wanted to now come here, instead of the other snare samples, and this also comes in handy if you want to do something like, okay, I wanted to take a different drum kit. So let's just say we'll take like more of a quick beat agent kit here. And this could be any. Let's say Berlin sounds good. And if I wanted that snare drum, I could load up multiple agents here, and you could just drag and drop and take any snare. But I could also just copy this pad, go directly here onto this D1 pad, and paste the pad. And now when I play the pattern, it's going to play back the new sample, replacing the snare. So I'll just kind of come right here. Let me just delete the pattern group here. Okay. So now when I would do that, the new snare drum would automatically just play back. And let me just take this and we loaded up a whole other pattern group. Got my kit. So you could hear the new snare. So it's really easy to kind of get different feels by kind of editing the MIDI data, or just by by changing the normal, by changing the feel, by editing the MIDI information. So all that great stuff there. So I see a question from Jake Clark about the is it just normal USB? So it is a USB connection, but it's not like I believe this is in reference to the e-licenser. But it's an USB e-licenser, but it's not like a memory stick that you could write files to. So it's kind of dedicated to software license management. So there's two big ones used in kind of music industry products. There's the iLock and the e-licenser. So you can transfer licenses back and forth. So if you had a number of different Cubase or virtual instruments or soft e-licenses, such as the Cubase Elements, you can transfer them to the hardware license. You can't really transfer it back, but some of the content and some of the like MP3 encoders for some of the smaller versions and Cubase Elements can be moved to the hardware license so that you can migrate it very easily back and forth. All right, so go through and make sure, let's check, see if I'm not missing a bunch of questions that have kind of come in. All right. All right, let me go through some of our questions here. All right, so we had a question about recording continuous controller values like expression or main volume with the MIDI data simultaneously. I'm just going to jump back here, review the question real quick, make sure I understand it correctly as I'm thinking. Seeing a couple comments on the quality of the audio as you stretch it. Yeah, we figured it wasn't supposed to sound bad, so that's why we made sure it sounded cool. All right, I'm just going back and just, okay. So this is from Andrew Poole Todd about always using kind of the CC11, CC7s before you record MIDI to make sure you have kind of a consistent level. All right, so when you kind of, and this is a very handy way, I'll just add a quick MIDI track here. And let's go ahead and just kind of, let's say we have, now with the, as we have MIDI notes, there's, different types of MIDI note messages and MIDI messages. So you're going to have note messages, and with each note message, you're going to actually have just a, your velocity. You're going to have a note on message, a note off message, the velocity, and the pitch. So, and these will kind of be indicated by, the different levels of a MIDI note. And you could actually kind of see this in a little more detail if you go to, let's say, the MIDI list editor here. So here you can see kind of value 1, value 2, 3, and 4 of our MIDI information. Now, a lot of people, especially composers, like to work where they always are kind of writing in particular data. So a common one is going to be expression. So if we have some expression data, they may also look at main volume here. So, and this would be controller 7. So say we have volume, and we could also just add another controller lane. We'll make our volume just a little more distinctly different dynamically here. So I'm going to use the tool, the line tool. And we could have our velocity data. So the velocity is associated with a note. We have our main volume. Now these generally need to be written in. The program doesn't necessarily write the values in. You'd have to hit record and move a knob that does continuous controller 7 or continuous controller 11 to enter that in. Now, one of the things that you could do is to actually assign quick controls. And this could make it, a lot of MIDI controllers will have a number of different quick controls. So when you go to your quick controls, these will give you kind of 8 controls that are commonly used. So if you wanted to come here, you could say, I wanted to have MIDI volume. I wanted to have, or we'll switch this to main volume, so we could look at our continuous controllers here. So let's say we wanted to have volume. I guess we could select the volume there, and we wanted to have another continuous controller here for expression. And another one that's very common is for using modulation to change sound. So we'll come over here and just say, and we have our mod wheel. So we could assign, we could have kind of 8 go-to parameters directly here. Maybe we'll set up one for panning. So, and it could be, different for, for different instruments. But you could actually now store these quick controls, and you could have, if once you go to your devices menu, to your device setup, you could do a MIDI learn for your quick controls. So once you go to your quick controls, you could learn a function. If you have any knobs on your controller, you could assign those knobs to control the quick control. So if I have knob 1 here, that would be volume, knob 2 would be expression, modulation, pan, etc. And you could store these as their own preferences, their own presets now. So you could activate the quick controls, and you could also learn your MIDI continuous controllers here. But you, again, have the ability to now come right over here and save it as a preset. So if you click just to the right of the quick control names, you could save that as a preset. So if you always are using the same controllers, but it's going to need to actually have the initial value written in. And you might have a way through the controller to, set it up so that it would automatically transmit that, but Cubase won't capture it if it's not being transmitted. So the quick controls can be saved independently, which is really handy. And also, if you wanted to come right over here, and you wanted to always see like these controllers, like let's say expression, mod, volume, velocity, I'll go ahead and add one here, and we'll make this into modulation. And you could resize each of these events by moving the line. But you could also save these as presets as well. So at this point, you could just say add preset, and we'll call it 2. And you could also, at this point, just kind of right click, just click here at the bottom and say, okay, I just wanted to see voice modulation, velocity. I want to see, this is one we did in our Google Hangout, and I wanted to do this one. So you could actually see all of your MIDI continuous controllers. But it's, you might, you find that, I think you said that you might have to you're wiggling around with the CC11 and CC7. It's just kind of the nature of MIDI that it's going to need to capture that to actually write that data in. But the continuous controllers will keep their value until another value, the continuous aspect is this value will be kept until another value is seen. So, a lot of times you may just have to do it once as a setup. So some people may record all their notes and then go back and just dial in a quick volume expression value for their continuous controllers. So I think if you do that, but just kind of the nature of MIDI, unfortunately. All right. We'll see. Okay. I could take a look at the Musictron. I see the about the Mac installer not doing the VST 2.4. I'll look into that for you. I'm pretty sure that it does the VST 2.4, but I'll look into it again. All right, so I see a question from Mo saying you also have the UR44, just bought it, but when you try to load it, it says device not found. One thing that it could be is there's the UR44 has a little switch on the back that says CC mode. So if you've installed the drivers, and that stands for class compliant. So if you've installed the drivers and you see the driver kind of pop up that it's installed, it could be that the switch in the back is set to CC mode. So you might have to just simply turn the CC mode to off for it to see the normal driver. So give that a try, Mo, and let me know how it works out. We'll go through some of our questions that have kind of popped up. All right, so we have a question from Mo about the chord track, about finding chords from about finding the chords from a harmony or from a CD. So it's not going to do extraction of the chord data from audio. So it's going to do it from MIDI information only at this point. So you need to have like a MIDI track, kind of like a violin, to do that. So. Okay, so we have a question on does it matter where the white volume fader is for a MIDI track? One of the things that, from Monster Jazz Licks had this question. So one of the things that we wanted to make sure that you have to be aware of is sometimes you may have multiple volume levels for MIDI events. So a MIDI track itself, if once you have that, you could have MIDI volume, which will be sent to the MIDI device, but you could also have the virtual instrument volume. So if it's going to a virtual instrument, that's automatically going to be generating audio directly into the Cubase mixer and into the audio engine itself. So you may notice that the MIDI volumes may be down because there's a MIDI resolution of 0 through 128, and it's kind of the binary nature of MIDI. That's why you see a lot of values of 0 through 128 or 0 through 127. So you have 128 values. So some people are a little uncomfortable with that resolution, feeling it's a little too rough or a little too coarse. So within the virtual instruments, we have, a much higher resolution. So many people prefer to do all of their mixing for virtual instruments using the instrument faders in the mixer. So if you're going out to an external MIDI device, maybe something like a Yamaha Motif, it may make more sense to use the traditional MIDI volume. But because that's really the only choice you have, unless you've configured it as an external instrument in the VST connections. But for the most part, going out to external devices, you would use the MIDI fader. And for virtual instruments, which is what a lot of people use now, you'd get a higher resolution with the instrument fader of the audio characteristics of that particular channel. So often you may load up a preset and notice that the MIDI volume is set to 0, and you're kind of, makes more sense to use the instrument channel within the VST mixer to have a lot of those for higher resolution and more control. All right, so, but I see another point from Monster Jazz Licks. We'll just read your question real quick. All right, so and getting back to my point for Monster Jazz Licks, you asked about sending to an external device, and that's exactly right. But when you move the fader, it'll kind of stay at that value until it sees another value. So, make sure that and sometimes the external synths may not actually respond to, could be filtered out of MIDI volume. And when we see the MIDI volume, you could also, when you go into the project, I believe it's maybe under, they've actually kind of done some of this stuff to consolidate. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Just see if I can find this one area of the program I'm thinking of. If not, we'll move on real quick. All right, well, I'm just kind of blanking on this one little area here. But so we'll go ahead and move on. But so, be aware of that, for virtual instruments, you could have two different faders. And for external MIDI device, you could have just your primary MIDI volume. So, All right. Now we had a question, I believe, from Greg about seeing note expression. So we'll go over this just a little bit. All right, so one of the things that we wanted to do is we realized that the MIDI specification itself, is written in 1982-ish. And one of the areas that it was pretty weak on was actually dealing with the MIDI continuous controllers like volume, expression, modulation, etc. On the same MIDI channel. So generally, the vast majority of MIDI continuous controllers work globally on the channel, and while that didn't seem like a big oversight in 1982, it's really kind of reared its head when we're trying to really simulate different real expressive instruments. So, for instance, if you've done MIDI sequencing where you have a kick, a snare, a hi-hat, and maybe a tom, and cymbal crashes, and you put them on 5 different tracks, and then you want the hi-hat to be a little louder, many people would naturally assume to draw in a MIDI volume message, and not realizing that the MIDI volume message that's drawn in for the hi-hat is then active for every voice that's on that same MIDI channel. So it gets to be a lot of people with drums deal with velocity, but you also run into different scenarios, like if you're trying to sound like a real horn section, you can come directly here. And that's how often a keyboard player would play a horn part, but it's not necessarily how a true horn section would change that. So as we kind of work on this with VST 3.5 instruments, and this includes instruments like Hallion Sonic, Pad Shop, Hallion 5, they have note expression capability so that we could actually double click on a particular note and have independent controllers. So you can see our controllers listed over here on the left-hand side when we click on note expression. So if I want to double click, I can now just grab this line and say, okay, we're going to have this note get louder, or let's have it go down in volume and then get louder. And I want this note here to actually get louder independently. And we'll have this note get louder longer. Now, if one of the keys, if you wanted to actually see the note expression, if you click on this icon in the upper left hand, kind of right below where it says transport here, you could see the note expressions indicated here. So this way I could take this one note, chord, and have independent control. Or if you wanted to set independent panning, or let's even draw in, say, pitch bend on a particular note. And you actually have a much finer resolution than what MIDI is able to deliver, especially for volume and pitch bend. So now, just kind of a quick, dirty example of what you're able to do. Now, you can actually assign these to different controllers, but if you have a controller, like I have an older Roland A80 controller, and as we kind of work on that, it has polyphonic aftertouch, so that allows me to actually see and control. So as I press down a note, if I hold a chord and press one note down longer, it could actually translate that polyphonic aftertouch directly into note expression data. So it gets to be a very powerful way of actually kind of expressing and making MIDI itself more expressive. All right, let me take a look through, see if we have our questions. I need to plug in one laptop. If you give me just a second, I need to plug in power before my battery runs out. All right. Now, we can also do some other interesting things with note expression. Now, sometimes you may notice that when you have note expression that you see these lines kind of on the actual notes themselves. So if you see this kind of weird, I've had this call a couple times where you see all these kind of graphic images, and you're like, why am I seeing that? It's because of the note expression data. So again, if you just kind of hide that, it'll just go directly to the actual and filter that out from your view. Now, note expression can be tied into Vari Audio in an interesting way as well. So if you have, for instance, a saxophone part here that we'll go ahead and listen to. So say we have a real saxophone part there. And so if I go to my audio warp and we go to, let's say, or not to audio warp, but to Vari Audio, and we can do an analysis of this, and we see this little button that says extract MIDI information. So once I actually take this, I could actually convert it directly into just notes and static pitch bend data, or just notes and no pitch bend data, which is what most programs do that kind of convert audio into MIDI data. But so I did two examples, one without any note expression and one with note expression. So if I wanted to listen to my note expression, my non-note expression, which is kind of what we hear with a lot of MIDI parts trying to imitate a saxophone. So we'll go ahead and just listen to this. So while it's playing the same notes and the same rhythm, it really doesn't convey the same kind of emotional aspects of it. So if I wanted to, now we have this note that was, this part that was automatically done with the note expression. So we can turn this directly into MIDI, and then we'll enable the view of the note expression. So we can see kind of all the little pitch bends and the little kind of dynamics will all be carried over. So we'll listen to this. So now if I wanted to actually listen to that tied directly into our note expression with the original track. So as you can see, you can kind of get a really high level of expression using the note expression. You can't really get through traditional MIDI. So, note expression is very powerful. Now, I see a question from Greg McCarty about if you have a couple of versions of Cubase still on your computer, is it wise, safe to delete these? If we kind of design our updates so that it doesn't kill the previous versions, because there could be like maybe a plugin that works only in 32-bit or works only 64-bit, but this or this operating system or so if you're happy with how everything is working, you could uninstall them. They're not hurting anything other than taking additional hard disk space by leaving them on. So we pay a lot of careful attention to detail with kind of making sure that you have your previous versions to go back and work with just in case. So you're not completely locked out of anything that changes that makes that one plugin that wasn't updated by a company that's out of business. So it's not really going to hurt you having the previous versions installed. I see some comments about the polyphonic key pressure and key finger independence to make it work. And I think in England there's a MIDI controller called a Rolly. It's almost like kind of like a silicone pad that you kind of as a piano keyboard, and it's really fantastic for working with the note expression because you can bend down on the keys very easily. So there's a lot of alternate MIDI controllers that are pretty exciting that can take advantage of some of the capabilities offered by the note expression. All right, so we'll go back to a couple of our questions. So we had a question about freezing tracks and causing different sounds. I don't think that I've come across this, but let me just open up like a piano part here and see if we notice a sound difference. So just jump back to this project here. I'll just revert this project so we don't have horrible sounding vocal automation, unintended automation. All right, and if you have any more questions or want anything clarified, just go ahead and leave the comments kind of in the comment field. Thanks everyone for your patience. Hope everyone's learning. Everyone learning a couple things. All right. So if we have a piano part here, so this is a good example. Sometimes you may see your MIDI that looks like this, and that's just turning off the note expression data right there. So if I want to look at this, we can see kind of typical piano part. So we can see it in our notation view. So now one of the things that we have is a freeze function. And we could do this in a couple of different places. But for virtual instruments, if I wanted to come here, so if I go directly to my VST instrument rack, in this case, we will see the Grand 3. And then we see this we'll just go ahead and freeze this instrument. Now, one of the things, you get this little dialog box. You could freeze the instrument only, but you could also freeze the instrument and channels. So if you have EQ or different like insert effects applied, you might want to make sure that you have the instrument and the channels selected here, and then you could unload this. And this is kind of really set up for doing older, maybe a system that's kind of not the fastest computer, and this is a way to kind of alleviate having all the real-time effects as once people really got into so once we actually see see more people were having a hard time getting all their virtual instruments. They kind of got addicted to it very quickly, and then their computer would kind of freeze up in the old days. So what you could do is basically hit the freeze button here, and that's going to render this as an audio track in the background. So now it's just going to play back a stereo audio file instead of processing my 10 gigabytes of this Yamaha C7 piano sample. So we'll just have this, and we'll see for 3 or 4 minute song here, it's done. So when we play back, So now it's just playing back just solely an audio file. Now, as you do this, you can't really change anything because you're kind of frozen the instrument. So if you needed to actually unfreeze it to do edits, but to me it sounded the same. So make sure that you can unfreeze, and you could keep the audio file. So if you want to go immediately back, you don't have to render it again, or you could just unfreeze the file. But once you click on the freeze instrument track, just make sure that you also have the instrument and channel selected, especially if we've done any additional processing, because that will change the sound. So something to be aware of. All right, so let's see. Hi, Clay. Good to see you online. So we had a question about one of the things that we have going on is they're calling it a research and development project, and it's kind of a a lot of the software developers that worked with the previous notation program were let go from their company, and it's being headed up by a guy named Daniel Spreadberry, who I got to meet at the Steinberg 30th anniversary party. So they're working on a kind of brand new monster notation package, which will have really great integration in with Cubase. So there's a lot of people who have been kind of following the blog. I think we'll see this out next year at some time. It's obviously kind of a huge task to completely rewrite a program and have it work really well directly in with Cubase with pretty incredible integration. So I think we'll probably see more of that next year. The best thing is you can probably see the Making Notes blog. But there's a lot of guys working on it. It's pretty exciting. So I think we'll see that next year. And as we get closer, we'll be able to have kind of more information and be able to do some of the Google Hangouts here, showcasing some of the cool new features with that. So thanks for your question, Clay. Clay's a big famous producer engineer. So good to see you online. All right. Okay. Okay. I saw your question here, Mo, or your comment about not being able to see the drivers and all. So if you want to maybe fill out a support request form from your My Steinberg account, the guys could probably give you a quick call and help you with that from our support department. Or if you wanted to contact me via email, you could do that as well. So. Yeah, we have a comment here. Daniel Spreadberry is amazing. He works with Sibelius. Well, he used to. So he's working with Steinberg now for about a year. So, he's a really, really wonderful guy. I had a great time meeting him at our 30th anniversary party in Hamburg this summer. All right, let me just go through. All right, yep. So, yeah, Clay is working on a big Broadway musical. So, I believe on Gloria Stefan, so should be a good show. All right, let me see. There's some other questions. Let me go through the list one more time. All right, so we had a question about, is there a way to import a vocal track with 5 or 6 parts through, I think it was General MIDI, and be able to divide all the vocals to each part separately? Generally, when you're thinking of vocals, it's generally going to be audio. If it is like MIDI information, one of the things that you're able to do is to come here. Let's say if we do have MIDI information, you could go to the MIDI information here, and you could play vocal sounds that are MIDI. It may not be what you mean, but if you're thinking of an audio file, there's no real way to kind of break apart the polyphonic audio. But if it is MIDI, one of the things you could do is just click on dissolve part here. And then at this point, we could say if we had multiple MIDI channels, or if we have different pitches. I could now take like my quartet here, my string quartet, and then as I do that, it can automatically split up the individual voices here and lay it out. And it's also like really good for if you have MIDI drums. So let's say, for instance, if I wanted to jump here, I could say we'll jump to the Groove Agent, for example. And let me just activate this project. So one of the things it's really good for, especially on drum parts with this, and I know it's not part of the original question, but if you have a lot of different drum notes and maybe you see this as when you go to the drum editor and you want to split each of these out, we can close the editors here and then you can separate the pitches. So you can say MIDI, dissolve part, separate pitches, and now each pitch will automatically be on its own channel. But again, if your question was really more pertaining to audio, Cubase doesn't handle that polyphonically. We could do that for monophonic sources. But if it's for MIDI, as kind of was in your question, you could just use the MIDI dissolve parts. All right. So let me see if you have any questions I've missed. I know we have one on some of the features of Cubase and Nuendo. I just wanted to see if we had any or more Cubase questions here. I'm just going to kind of roll back here, scroll through some time. Make sure haven't missed any big questions or comments. If you have any more quick questions, feel free to kind of enter them in. See, question about dissolving Dave Brubeck's chords. Yep, you can do that. So, okay, so we had a question real quick about tail size and unload instrument when frozen in a freeze dialog. So if we open up the freeze dialog again here. All right, so the tail size. This often is with instruments that have reverb associated with them. So when the note when the note itself sends a note off message, you may still have, information or sound that's still resonating, like reverb. So one of the things that's really handy with that is the tail size allows you to kind of, if there's reverb on a particular patch, you could add additional information so that the reverb doesn't go like pop and get completely cut off. So that's what the tail size is. And the other question was unloading the instrument. So one of the reasons why a lot of people would be freezing a particular instrument is because it could be taking a lot of CPU power. And depending on the design of the instrument, some of the instruments can still take up a lot of memory or CPU usage, regardless of if they're actually playing back notes. So a lot of sample-based instruments can still take up a lot of processing and vital memory. So what the unload instrument does is it basically turns that instrument off in the background, so it's not taking any additional resources away from you, away from your computer. So at that point, you could actually just say, okay, when you're playing back, the instrument is unloaded. The tails are capturing all the notes that are hanging over past when the sound would seem to decay, but the sound with the reverb is still carrying on. So all those things are carried over. All right, so we had a real quick question on kind of groove quantizing. So there's a number of ways of doing groove quantize. So we'll just let me jump to our project here real quick. So if you actually have different, and you want to capture different grooves. Now, one of the things that a lot of people want to do is to have a quick swing feel. So we can show you a great way of doing that as well. Or they want to actually kind of extract MIDI information from a particular, let me just revert this real quick. I'll just open up one other instrument here. So let's say if we want to add a little more subtle swing to an instrument. And we'll start off with like a pattern from Groove Agent here, and then we'll copy that out. We'll take something that's a little very straight sounding. So let me just load up one from our studio kit. So just load up this. All right, so we'll take kind of this pattern here. All right, so we'll go ahead, and you could also just kind of drag the pattern from the pattern pad itself directly onto the project window. So let's say I'll go ahead and just kind of solo this. And let me just kind of increase the tempo here a little bit. So with MIDI information, one of the great things you could do is actually just come here and you have MIDI inserts. And one that a lot of people miss is a quantizer plugin. So you can come right here and there's a swing factor. So you can just say, isn't the best example for this, but so you can just kind of add different levels of swings. Exactly, I want this to be like an 8th note swing. So if you come here, you could just, as you kind of change that, you could just have that, and you could have kind of a real-time quantize, adjust the strength of that. Now, something else that's really handy that a lot of people don't know, if we have, let's say, our drum loop that we were listening to earlier, and let's say you like the feel of that particular drum loop, you could come here and go to hit points. And what's kind of cool about this is you could adjust the threshold here. And as you come right here, you can say create groove from the hit points. Now, once you click on create groove, once you go to your quantize setup under your MIDI, you can go to your advanced quantize, or just go to your quantize panel, rather. You can see that you have the timing of this particular drum loop now automatically applied in the quantize panel. So if you wanted to even come here and adjust the swing amount as well, so you could just kind of come right here, adjust the length, velocity, position, you know, how far it goes out. So at this point, you could do a lot of different things to adjust the feel of, you know, the particular quantize, or you could actually just kind of make your own based right here. So you can say, okay, we want to have a length, the velocity quantize, position. At this point, you could have all sorts of kind of you know, additional functions to be able to kind of tweak your actual sound. So you could actually save that as a preset. So if you really like a feel, let's say, you know, if you wanted to get, you know, like Toto's Rosanna and you like that shuffle feel, you could just simply load in that audio file and then at that point, extract the feel right here, and at that point, just simply adjust the quantization and save that as your own preset. Okay, so I see a question on with new Waves plugins loaded, working fine, but every time you start Cubase, it prompts you for it's prompting you for the location. I haven't used the Waves plugins in forever, but I'm not particularly sure with that. I haven't used them in a long time. But it could be something, perhaps dealing with the Wave shell. So it's been a long time since I've done that, but you may want to kind of check directly with Waves on that. Because if Cubase kind of sees it, it's, it could be just kind of looking for like a Wave shell file. So you might want to, install that into a particular folder that Cubase kind of looks to, or it could also perhaps be a 32-bit, 64-bit issue. So if you're running 64-bit version of Cubase, make sure that you have the 64-bit version of the plugins, because that could also kind of cause issues like that. But I haven't run them in a really long time, maybe about 10 years or so. All right. So we had a question on resizing kind of the Groove Agent 4 panel. The size is fixed here, but you could do a tremendous amount of, tabbed editing to get to different functions. So it doesn't take up too much screen real estate, but you can get a tremendous amount of information. So like all the mixers make sense, but it's not kind of dynamically sized like we see in the VST Mix Console or the Cubase project windows with that. All right, let me check, see if I have any other questions that we'd collected earlier that I've missed. Okay, we had a quick question on using, which is better for kind of working on an indie film, Cubase or Nuendo. So I'll go ahead and open up Nuendo real quick, and we'll take a quick look at that. If there's any Cubase questions before we leave, just let me know real quick. I'll hang out a second. Sometimes as we do this, there's a buffer that builds up, so it could be a minute when I say something to when you hear it. So I'll just hang out for a minute, and then we'll move on to a couple things in Nuendo for film. Hope everyone's finding this useful. Thanks for going online and watching. All right, so wait just another minute, and then we'll go ahead and open up Nuendo. All right, so we'll go ahead and exit Cubase and open Nuendo. We'll show you a couple cool things for if you're mixing for film. As you can see, we didn't have enough projects open here. Sorry for this weird 3D effect. We'll get Nuendo open up here. All right, so a couple of things at Nuendo is we kind of gear it more towards, doing post-production, and this can mean a lot of different things to different people. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the things that make Nuendo like really well suited for working with film or video games. One of the things that's really compelling is something called, on the transport called edit mode. So once edit mode is active, anytime that you'd move an event, you could see the video frame update. So at this point, if I wanted to have the fans start, or right at a particular gunshot, we could move the event and have the fans and have the event automatically correlate directly with the video here. So that's very handy, especially if you're doing like tons of Foley work, or if you're working on placing sound effects, footsteps, even some ADR tasks. Really handy for that. Now, Nuendo can have up to 32 marker tracks, and some people go, okay, why do you need so many marker tracks? So as we're working with, especially in post-production, you may have like a marker track for each character, like where their dialogue comes in. So if I wanted to come here, I could open up a marker track, and you could see, and you could just toggle back and forth between your different marker tracks here. So let's say if I wanted to do like some dialogue replacement, I could click on this marker, and this is a cycle marker, and then we could open up the ADR tool set. So I would open up the marker track here, then click on the ADR, and then we could rehearse.
Help me.
So you could have different settings here. So you could have it do a counter. So if you wanted to rehearse the counter, so you got to do like a 3, 2, 1.
Help me.
And so, or if you wanted to change this to have an inverted counter, or to do a swipe. So if you wanted to do a swipe, you can see what this looks like now.
Help me.
Or a swipe to center. And this is often a very tedious task in audio recording.
Me.
You could have the dialogue show up on the screen for the actor. Now, as you do this, we can now just arm this particular track. So let's just give it an input here. And then at this point, all you have to do is rehearse.
Help me.
We'll now record.
Help me.
And now we can just simply come right over here, and after we record it, audition it.
Help me.
And now go directly to another cue. Rehearse that cue. No! Record this cue. No! And then review your recording. So it really kind of makes that whole process, significantly faster. Now, some other things that make Nuendo unique is a concept of network collaboration. So often what we see in a lot of different post facilities or facilities is you may have multiple edit suites in addition to kind of like a main stage. And what you're able to do here is to, like, different people could be assigned by an administrator, if you will, to different tracks, and then each of those tracks, like a dialogue editor could be doing all the dialogue edits, the music editor music edits, the sound effects editor the sound effects, etc. And they could, as they're working on their individual copies of Nuendo, fly in the different changes over the network, so that if the sound effects editor is done with his parts, he could just upload and commit and send all the changes to the master project, and people could work dynamically over the network. So it gets to be a very powerful thing. One of the things that has also been incorporated is a loudness management. So you actually have a loudness track directly here. And you could actually, like one of the new broadcast standards we're seeing is the R128 standard. So you could actually take all of your mixes and make sure, one, that there's onboard R128 metering. In addition to that, you're going to have the ability, when you do your export audio dialogue, to take and make sure that you can normalize to make sure that it's R128 compliant. Because if you deliver a mix now for broadcast that's going to be above the R128 standard of minus 23 loudness units, it will often be immediately rejected. At that point, you'd have to remix it to be compliant. So now you could take care of all the loudness requirements. So those are just a couple of things that make kind of Nuendo really unique for film. We could spend some more time on that in a future hangout. We could have one kind of dedicated to that. Now I see a question here. Will QSense work with MIDI tracks? So if it's a MIDI track, this is from Greg McCarty. If it's a MIDI track that's being routed out to like a virtual instrument or an external instrument that's been set up as a virtual instrument, you could have that carried directly over into the Q mix as well. So yes, you can. But if it's going out to like an old hardware synth and that's not routed back into the audio engine, it's not going to be carried over into the Q mix. All right, we'll see if we have more questions coming in. We're going to be wrapping up, so we've gone about 2 hours, a little over 2 hours. I'd like to thank everyone for hanging out here in the Google Hangout. I hope everyone found it helpful and kind of learned a couple things. We'll see if there's any last-minute quick questions before we wrap up. This will be online. Generally, you could kind of watch it. If you want to watch it, it's usually up within a few hours, so it's a great way to kind of go back and review. So if something went by quickly, you could go back, pause it, rewind, watch it a couple times. If you have any questions for me, you can feel free to email me at gondo@yamaha.com. So we'll hang out just for a couple minutes, see if there's any more quick questions, and then we'll wrap up. Again, thank everyone for coming out. I hope you found this helpful. We'll see if there's more questions that are rolling in. Yes, for Frank's, there is video playback inside of Cubase as well, so it's kind of really perfect for doing all sorts of film composition stuff. So there's video playback directly in Cubase as well, so you have a video track. All right, we'll wait just a minute, see if we have any other questions that pop up. All right, so we'll just wait just a couple minutes and then we'll wrap up. Again, thanks everyone for hanging out and going through the Google Hangout. If anyone goes back and kind of rewatches it and wants to take kind of a quick summary of the questions and topics covered, and you wanted to send it to me, we could put it in so other people watching it can kind of jump to particular questions. So if anyone wants to, yeah. So Greg, just to my point now, this will probably be a little delayed. But if anyone kind of keeps notes and wants to, you could send them to the youtube.com/clubcubase of kind of the topics. Sometimes we go through a lot of different questions, and if you wanted to, if anyone does keep a note of the topics, please feel free to send it to me, and I could put it in the info line. So if someone's looking for a particular topic to be covered, we're happy to kind of go over that. So. And that way they could jump right to a particular point. All right, we'll just hang out, see if there's any other additional questions. And if not, we'll wrap up. I had a quick question for my email. It's just gondo at Steinberg, or gondo at yamaha.com. I'll go ahead and enter it in here. All right, wait about another 15, 20 seconds. If not, we'll wrap up. All right, see if there's any last minute quick questions that pop in. And if not, we'll go ahead and get everything wrapped up. All right. Well, thank you very much. Look forward to seeing you on the next Google Hangout. Take care, and thanks for participating. Bye.